All right, so I'm going to do a quick presentation here from a number of assets. My name is Yorke Rhodes. I co-founded blockchain at Microsoft in 2015. Let me turn on my camera. Very excited to be here, as always, talking to friends and fam in the community. I'm just going to share a couple of quick thoughts, and then I think Kyle was going to be here to do some Q&A, but if he's not, happy to wrap up at that point. So let me share my screen first here. So for those of you who don't know me, I've been down the rabbit hole since early 2015, actually returned to Microsoft in the end of 2014, and then sort of fell down the rabbit hole over the next 6+ months after that. And in the middle of 2015, recognized that there was a tremendous opportunity with blockchain technology, particularly in its most advanced form, which we're seeing today, obviously, with the crypto space and Ethereum, and other layer 1s and layer 2s that are trying to play catch up. So very exciting opportunity, obviously, and I think most of you probably recognize that, given that you've opted into this event. I come from very much of a digital native perspective, although I didn't grow up with technology in the way that my children did. I started in hardcore with computer technology in college, but before that was a long time what you might call a tinkerer with different types of technologies. And so currently I actually also teach at NYU, where I stay in touch with my master's students on all things digital and e-commerce, as well as sprinkle in a bunch of my entrepreneurship teachings around what it's like to do startups inside of a large enterprise. My self-attested professional history is on LinkedIn. I use those words very specifically. And my social is on Yorke Rhodes, and I'm very excited to see what Twitter's doing in the NFT space. I think that's a phenomenal advancement. So I'm currently at Microsoft. I've been stewarding the company now 6 years in on our blockchain journey. We started our blockchain journey very much focused on enterprise blockchain because, if you go back to 2015, this whole space was so new to enterprises that it was not even a thought that we would ever do something like publish NFTs as assets. And obviously, 2021, there's been major shift in the market associated with awareness that there's really interesting technology here, not just on the NFT space, but generally as crypto and digital assets. And then also, we've seen worldwide interest in central bank digital currencies, cross-border payments, banking the unbanked, and some amazing examples, obviously, with things like Axie Infinity, who unintentionally banked 24% of their users who are unbanked. So there's some really interesting things going on in the gaming space, as you're all, I'm sure, aware. Just very quickly, I wanted to share a couple of things. There's been massive waves of disruption happening throughout history. If you look at the computer era waves of disruption, these are the ways that I would articulate those waves. Personal computer, versus mainframe. Client-server database versus, some big centralized database systems. Email moving from voicemail, and that literally only happened in the 90s, right? And so that's kind of, relatively new on the innovation wave scene. Obviously, the internet became the internet for consumers after about 1995, generally, when it sort of crossed the chasm and started to gain the same type of interest that we see today. Mobile and wireless, it's been around for a while, but like mobile wireless with smartphones really only started in early 2000s. Along that journey, we also had cloud computing, AWS, Microsoft, Google, in the cloud space, and a lot of shifts in terms of how we buy software as well, and how we buy services, like how do we rent a room in a house, right, versus a hotel, Bitcoin, obviously, et cetera, coming out in the 2008, 2009 timeframe. Fast forward to where we are today, beyond 2015, And 2020 sort of heralded in a massive change in how we think about technology, making digital native first experiences much more important. Basically, the world had to follow the lead of startups that have been basically remote first for the last 10 years, probably. So finally, the world is waking up that, hey, we have to actually figure out how to work in a hybrid and or remote capacity. That will not change. That will continue forward for sure. The need of startups that have been, we're seeing major corporations start to embrace and realize that we've been effective working remotely for the last year and a half, and it's pretty hard to change that argument that says, now I need you to come back in the office. Basically, employees will vote with their feet and say, well, I've been quite effective at this out of the office. Why do I need to be in it? I've been effective. So it's something to think about in terms of another major disruption that's happening. And certain companies like Zoom and Microsoft and Teams and Slack and other companies that support this digital native presence have been the beneficiaries of that. If we look at what's going on in 2021, it's the recognition that the internet now can consist of digital consumers who hold digital value and digital inventory, right? And that's basically the advent of crypto, DeFi, and NFTs. Now, not everybody actually talks about it in the way that we do in the blockchain space. The conversation has emerged and effectively crossed the chasm. And so I actually wrote a blog about this specific point, which I want to share a couple of details from as well. There's some great examples of learning resources for folks who are thinking about these types of disruption waves, particularly around crypto, and just sort of how we've gotten to where we are. I can share those links as well. And I think I'm going to take one step back here and show you some of the work that I've been doing in my day job, and then also talk a little bit about this disruption that's definitely represented by the Bored Ape Yacht Clubs and the Axies of the world. This data point, before I go, this 1.5 million DAUs, that's a daily active user stat. It's a type of stat that is used by any internet startup looking at what's the activity of users on their platform. And so Axie Infinity getting to that point in such a short period of time is just a massive success. And clearly it's the economics of the platform among many other things. And so this is waking people up, right? So let me quickly go to, before I jump there, this is actually our first major announcement in the blockchain space where we were working closely with Consensus. Actually, Joe Lubin, oddly enough, slept through this photo op. But Andrew Kries was there representing Consensus, and clearly Vitalik, who you recognize. And the gentleman next to me is actually Satya Nadella, who is the CEO of Microsoft, still the CEO of Microsoft, and was relatively new CEO at the time. So this was our Visual Studio work, really the beginning of our journey, only a couple months after we started the work. So I'm not going to go too much more into that. Let me sort of bring you to the present by jumping into some of the work that I'm currently doing. So I sit actually today in the cloud hardware supply chain. I started working on this project about 3.5 years ago. So that's typical corporate years in terms of how you get initiatives going. Lots of internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, funding cycles to get it lined up. But we've had a phenomenal year since I joined this team full time last July. We actually achieved essentially a Gartner success. Gartner has a supply chain of the year award, and they have it in multiple categories. We won a category for innovation with our blockchain work, and then we were also voted into the supply chain breakthrough of the year. So if you think about sort of corporate stalwarts or references, while we may not think this in the startup space or the blockchain space in particular, corporations look to companies like Gartner to say, like, what's real, what's going on. And so actually getting this recognition with Gartner is a phenomenal success for any startup journey. and a phenomenal signal to many others who are not steeped in a particular technical approach that, hey, there's actually something here. And so there's a couple of blogs that you can find that I've written. This was the second one specifically about this project. This one had to be signed off by Gartner because we're using their name and quotes from them as well. There's a lot of good material about this, but these were basically the awards. There were 4 categories with some other brands that won these other categories, and then an elevation into the Supply Chain Breakthrough of the Year award. Great success on any journey, and this early in my journey on this project, as well as I think for blockchain to have this recognition from Gartner is a remarkable thing. And honestly, I didn't expect that we would be anywhere near this, the ability to achieve this. It wasn't even on my radar. It just so happened that last fall I had an opportunity to put in an application, a pretty extensive application, and I worked with our team to actually do that application. So one of the things that we have actually discovered through our work is that it's very challenging actually to do a multi-party system like this, where you have a lot of complicated internal enterprise systems and a lot of suppliers that you don't have direct relationships with, but where you still want traceability and visibility. And this is a classic problem when you're looking at materials traceability, raw materials traceability, trying to avoid or show transparency that you're avoiding conflict minerals. That means you need to have guarantees from suppliers that are well up the supply chain. Lots of different ways to achieve this. We have been focused on this using Quorum and the privacy capability within Quorum, Tessera, to support the data requirements of this system. If we had started at a different point in time, we might have chose to go the baseline path, but baseline was not nearly mature enough when we started this. And what happens is, like any approach, you get locked into effectively an approach that's been authorized through security reviews by all the parties that are participating. So that's kind of where we are. We're continuing to iterate on this and having pretty good success and great recognition. So we're continuing that work forward. There's another post on this also with a little bit more detail from an architecture perspective that you can also find. But let me move on from that. That's a major project at Microsoft. There's another major blockchain project using Quorum as well at Microsoft called the Xbox Royalties Project, which also has a lot of public reference material about it. Two quick things I wanted to highlight. One, we do a major hackathon every year at Microsoft internally. The hackathon typically has a very large number of participants. Okay, reload. There we go. Come on. And I think we have 18,000 internal participants this year, which hopefully this page will refresh. And then there's many different projects. So it's a pretty interesting 3-day hackathon internally that people get essentially time off from work to participate in, and a lot of interesting things going on. So we're doing one this year that is essentially following the model of one of my colleagues, some work that he did on something called Expansion Punks. Expansion Punks is basically taking the concept of CryptoPunks and balancing the diversity bias in CryptoPunks. He was inspired by his daughters who were looking for punks that were more evocative of the type of thing that they would be interested in as young girls. So he basically remodeled a set of traits so that he could actually effectively come up with a model that has a better balance from a diversity perspective. It's a pretty interesting example. So we're actually using some of the work that he did and this Explorer as well to just take a look at how will we do other types of NFT collections and how do you go create those traits. He's done a phenomenal job as well documenting this. And from a documentation perspective, that's also linked on this same site. Great project, well documented. We're leveraging that in our hackathon work, which happens in about 2 weeks. That has not reloaded. Okay, so on the NFTs and crossing the chasm moment, which I've been speaking about actually for a while, I wrote a blog and published it earlier this week that really just talks about, why are NFTs getting the play that they're getting, and what does that actually mean from an underlying protocol perspective, and how do we think about the value proposition of crossing the chasm, and what might be the concerns of various folks who are protocol engineers and steeped in the space, because what happens is when you get to someone seeing the value proposition of an NFT without really understanding the underlying technology, they may actually never be using a solution that is true to what is the definition of an NFT. And that's a major problem in any crossing the chasm moment. So this is not new for blockchain and not new for NFTs. So I just put together a little note about, sort of going through what's going on in the space. And this is, not just focused on an audience of people in the blockchain space trying to understand what does it mean to cross the chasm, but also helping brands as well understand like what's going on here and why is this interesting. So it's just a short piece on that, and also helps for anyone who doesn't know what those terms mean to just define very clearly when someone says, there's a crossing the chasm moment or a tipping point, what's the definition of those terms. So that was about all, I think, the time that was allocated. So I will open it up and see if there's any questions from the audience. And if not, then we can wrap it up.